Hi, this is Elizabeth Cross-Nickel, and I'm filling in for John Seacrest today. Super happy to have you at our Seattle underscore Angel meetup. We're really about increasing the ecosystem for investors and for founders in the startup community. And John's been doing this for quite a number of years. Our guest speaker, David Bland, is here tonight, and David's going to introduce himself in a few minutes. But David and John have been working together for a number of years, and they have been working with the lean startup focus. And so that's going to be our talk tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me this evening. I'm out here in Northern California, so not too far from you all, but also very warm. Apparently, it's almost as hot as where it is you are. So I am going to not be using slides today. So I'm going to be using this mural board, and then I will share a link in chat in a bit, and you all can join me for a little exercise that we do. But yeah, I'm David, again, out here in Northern California. My career has been all over the place, as most entrepreneurs tend to say. That I went to school for design, ended up in .com craze for about 10 years, was one for three with startups there. So the one that was successful, I was there for almost 8 years, and we pivoted. We went from, we thought we were a B2C company, ended up being B2B. We didn't call it a pivot back then. We just kind of freaked out and it was almost out of money and realized that banks were our customers. I'd like to say we pivoted based on data and insights, but it was kind of like, nobody wants our product except these banks. Maybe they're really our customers. And that's how we took off. We were acquired for 16 million. And some of the others I was at, we just kept persevering no matter what. It was like, well, people don't know what they want. We'll just keep building this. We'll make it better. And didn't pan out so well. Then I switched coasts, and so been in the Bay Area for like about 10 years in Silicon Valley and around helping companies there and startups there and accelerators. I work with some VCs there. And then recently, during the pandemic, relocated outside Sacramento. So kind of all over the place. My career is kind of a weird mix of startups and also coaching. And so working with big companies and with startups. And so mostly the single thread I could say that's common throughout them all is that it's based on kind of this zero to product market fit area. So usually, even though I've helped scale companies, where I really find that I enjoy working and helping people is if you have an idea, is that messiness to when you find something that works and you scale it. I usually back away when it's time to scale, but I do work with some VCs down here in the Valley. I was just listening to some of your ideas, and I work with some Web3 cohorts for Tim Draper down at Draper University, and work in a little bit in food and hospitality, a little bit in chemicals, a little bit in health tech. I don't really focus on a specific industry. So hopefully you all get something out of this session tonight. All right, so the goal today, and I try to have a learning objective for every session I do, but it's basically like to help you de-risk what you're working on. So some of you are probably a little further along in your journey. Some of you already have, customers on your platform selling things. So, you're a little further along. Some of you, sounds like you might be ready to create a company in 3 years. And so you're just exploring. Some of you had side hustles. It's fine. But basically, whatever you're working on, no matter where you're at in your journey, I want to help you kind of de-risk that and basically feel a little more confident if you're on the right track or not. I also have a code of conduct for everything I do, which is pretty much the Bill and Ted code of conduct, which is be excellent to one another. Not too worried about this group, but basically, when we're sharing out, and please hold your questions to the end of after the exercise we do. But if you're sharing out and giving feedback, just be constructive in tone and in language. Okay, so I'm going to give you kind of a high level. A lot of this is going to be based off of my book I wrote with Alex Osterwalder. It's over 2 years old now, I think. Yeah, it's over 2 years old now. Almost 3. This fall will be 3. And I think it's just getting started. It's amazing with business books. It feels like, I think the stat my publisher gave me was almost like, it's really rare for a business book to even, a nonfiction business book to sell even 10,000 copies, right? And we're well on our way to 6 figures in ours. And so basically, I think it's in 20 different languages. So I think why it resonated so well is we tested the book along the way. It's pretty much based on like how I coach companies, So I tried to put on my like coaching hat when I was writing it and tried to write in that tone. And I think that's why it landed really well. But one of the three themes, the three themes that we keep talking about in the book, and I want to share with you a little bit, and you're probably familiar with these, but I'll cover them really briefly, which is this idea of desirability, viability, feasibility. It's kind of, I first learned it in design thinking and design school, but you like pull this thread, it goes back through decades of human-centered design. But essentially, this idea of like, hey, do they want this? So when you think about, do people want this? Is there a value prop? Is it like the value prop resonate with the customer? Do we understand their jobs to be done? Like, what risk do we have around desirability of the initiative we're trying to do? A viability, which is more kind of the should we. Granted, you should have a moral compass, but basically, in addition to that, should we like do this? Is it something we can make money at? Is it something that we can at least sustain? Like even nonprofits I work with some like huge nonprofits around the world. And they have to show impact, for the funding they've raised, and so even they have to be viable in some sense. And then feasibility is more about the can we, and the can we is technical, but it's also regulatory governance. Some of you working in food and other things, in medical devices, those worlds are also heavily regulated. So just because you can do it technically, it doesn't mean that the regulations will allow you to do it, and you'll be shut down if you violate them. Or at least usually shut down. I've noticed some startups in the Valley just don't get shut down. just keep going. I don't know. Uber's a good one. Anyway, so when you look at this, the thing I want you to take away from this framing, and I'm going to jump to the canvas in a minute, is if you only focus on, let's say, desirability and viability. So you focus on, hey, people want this, and we think we can make money doing this, they'll pay for it, but you don't focus on feasibility, you're going to fail in a big way, because you're going to fail on the execution side of things. So I think of like a lot of Kickstarters that didn't make the light of day. they promised to like great explainer video and concept video and a bunch of perks, and people threw money at it. But then if you couldn't figure out how to do it, right, that's still a big risk, the backstage. The other way is, if you look at this, if you say, okay, well, something's desirable and it's feasible, so people want it and I can do it, but they won't pay enough, or I can't create it at a low enough cost to keep it going, then that's going to fail too. I did a big keynote before the pandemic in San Francisco at Mind the Product, and I used Clearly Canadian, which I loved back in the day in the 90s, as like my product, that was desirable and feasible, but it wasn't viable because it cost so much. And then other players came in the market like Pepsi Clear and all these things and kind of disrupted it. It is back now because VCs bought it and kind of like did an Indiegogo and brought it back, but it's not the distribution it was before. I think when they bought the IP, it was literally in a cardboard box. It was like not a lot left of the company by the time they got it. But you can fail that way too, where somebody really loves it, and you could do it, but if you can't make the numbers work, you're going to fail. And no one, that's really frustrating, because you can have a product everyone loves and you still fail because you just can't make it work, the numbers work. And then the last one here that unfortunately still happens here in the Valley and other places too, which is, you can do it and it looks like there's a model there, but just nobody cares. And you're not solving a real need. It doesn't mean everything has to be needs-based, but it's like just nobody desires it. There's no like job to be done behind what you just built. And a lot of these I see, I went to so many meetups. I used to run Lean Startup Circle in San Francisco. And I remember vividly having this guy just stand up there and give us this really long dissertation about this very like complex algorithm that he'd been working on for like 6 years. And he had no idea what job it actually solved for people, or what the use case was, or what the value prop was, or who the customer segment, or how much he would charge for it. And so while he was very passionate about the technology, he was very frustrated, because I think that's why he ended up at our meetup. He was very frustrated because it was just like, I keep working on this. I've like spent my life, years of my life on this, and I don't know what's wrong. And it's just like, if you miss desirability, it kind of doesn't matter how awesome your thing is. Like if it doesn't really solve for a problem, it doesn't resonate with people, it's going to fail. So ideally, right, like any good Venn diagram, right, you're going to want to focus on all three. Now, you don't have to focus on all three at once. Usually, and I'll kind of share this in the next segment here, but usually what I see is desirability is typically the biggest risk early on, because you are brilliant and you could probably, do anything. But if you miss the customer segment and you don't have a value prop, and it's not connected to a job to be done or some kind of pain they're experiencing or gain they're looking for, you're going to fail in a big way early on. So what we've done is Alex was the first one to do this, and I was kind of like around him when he was doing it. Yusi and I were writing together. And I think the Testing Business Ideas book is the first book where we officially, use this framing on the canvas. But basically, we were just like layering that thinking over the canvas. So the canvas has been around at least 10 years at this point. When I first met Alex, it was right when Business Model Generation launched that book. I was like, oh, this is brilliant. And I'm already doing lean startup stuff. And this stuff like fits, because I was working with Eric Ries back then. And I was like, this stuff fits together really well. And that's how we became kind of friends over time. And we realized that people kind of take this check the box mentality. And I'll zoom in a bit here for you. It's really not that useful when you think of something like this as like, I'm just going to check the boxes and yeah, I'm going to go execute on this. One, there's a ton of assumptions you have in your model. And two, while you get some value out of like checking the boxes, it's going to be the relationships that like how things connect that's really going to help you like tell a story to investors. I work with VCs, and they, I work with them because they want their portfolio to be able to tell a coherent story, or people that want, they might invest in tell a coherent story. And so you may not like show this canvas to an investor, or an investor might not request this canvas, but there's a good chance they're going to ask about all the stuff that's here. So when you think about it, the kind of the flow I use is, okay, well, who's your customer? Like who are you serving here? And then I jump over to, okay, so what's your value proposition? Sorry, like a little messy drawing here this evening. There we go. And then, what are your channels? Okay, let me go back to my thicker one here. So what are your channels? So think acquisition, distribution. And then, okay, so what are the types of relationships you have with your customer? Are they automated? Are they in person? Are they ongoing? Are they one time? So think through what's the nature of the relationship. And you'll notice that's all desirability risk. Pretty much. It's all like this interconnection of your value prop and your customer. It's a lot of desirability risk early on when you're filling out your strategy. You're like, oh, maybe I've never talked to my customer, or maybe I don't know how to reach them. And so just be mindful that early on, this is a lot of desirability risk. And then we drop down to, okay, so how are you going to make money? So this is all front stage, right? And then on the backstage, we quickly go into, okay, what are the verbs? So think key verbs, activities that you need to do to make this work. Not every activity in the world, but just like the main ones. What are the resources you need? So think physical and digital. What do you need to make this happen? What's this going to cost? And then who are you going to partner with potentially? And be careful with startups, because we partner, and I see this with other startups too nowadays. Like they want to partner with big companies right away. Like I was just talking to somebody who was like, I'm partnering with a large international bank. And like when he just said those words together, I felt nervous for this founder, because in the grand scheme of things for big companies, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, it's like, whatever, that's fast for us, but in startup years, that's like an eternity, right? So just be careful when you're thinking about partnerships. But one way you can think about a partnership is, hey, we're only going to partner with people who bring an activity that we can't do or need help with, or they bring a resource that we don't have and we need to make this happen, or maybe even they create a channel for us to reach our customer. Now, when you think of partnerships, that's a really strong way to think about it. I mean, you could if depending on how disciplined you are, you could create KPIs for all this too, and measure and say, okay, what's the health of this partnership? Can they do X, Y, and Z? Another thing to think about is, well, we need to deliver our value prop to our customers and reach them, and we want to build a relationship with them, right? And then we also need to generate revenue somehow, so that should come from somewhere. And oh, by the way, our costs should be less than what we're charging here. And so when you start thinking about it, and you can draw your costs from activities and resources, and you could say, oh, those are our costs. If we have to do these things and have these things, the verbs and the nouns, this is kind of backing our way into cost. So I don't really teach this as a checklist. The way I teach this is this is like your story, basically. And so where my book kind of picks up is, there's this great series from Strategyzer, right? And Alex Osterwalder, he's based out in Lausanne, in Switzerland. And the designers that make these are in Toronto, Alan and Trish and team. And they already had the great books, like we had with Business Model Generation, Value Prop Design. And we say it's a stack. It's like literally a stack at this point. It's like a stack of books. And I was like, we need something to plug in here. We need something to help people test, and that's kind of my background, right? There's a lot of like lean startup, early adopter, design thinking, agile, all that stuff mixed together. And so what we ended up doing is saying, okay, let's write down our assumptions around, this strategy that we have, our business model, because it's not fact, especially early on. It's just a bunch of guesses. And then let's map them out and try to figure out, okay, which ones should we focus on? So I have this little 2x2 I helped create called assumptions mapping. It's used by Google and governments and all kinds of things now. But why it works, I think, is that you just kind of have, well, how important is this to my success? And then how much evidence do I have that supports the statement? And so what happens, you start bringing one over and you say, okay, well, we have some big assumptions around like the jobs the customer has, right? Like we don't even know if they have these jobs or trying to do these tasks. When you pull your next one over, you can say, well, is this more or less important than that one? And do I have more or less evidence? And then once you do that, it comes together pretty quickly. And it's really relative. I'm not looking for pixel perfect, as placement on this thing. It's more of a focusing mechanism. But what should probably happen early on is that you don't necessarily have like a lot of blue. That's why I like colors. You don't have a lot of blue in the top right. You should have probably some green and a lot of orange. And let me zoom in for you all. So basically, when you look at like what are the riskiest assumptions? Like that's how Eric could frame it. Or what are your leap of faith assumptions? Which is kind of even like pulling from like Kierkegaard. But basically, I'm doing the same thing with this exercise, except I'm just using a little different words, but I'm trying to get you here. Like I'm trying to get you to focus here, right? So if we say this is a leap of faith, right? Or we say this is the riskiest, right? That's what I'm trying to get you to. I'm trying to get you to, oops, let me screw this over. To focus on, okay, if this is wrong, it kind of doesn't matter what else we do. It really doesn't matter. So what we tend to do is we have people kind of sketch these out. If I'm working with founders, sometimes they do them by themselves. Sometimes they have their advisors give feedback on it. If it's a founding team, and it's cross-functional. So if you have people that can talk to the desirability, viability, feasibility, risk, even better, we kind of try to map these out and say, okay, this is probably wrong, but based on what we know today, this is what we think are the riskiest assumptions. So if we're going to experiment, let's do this first, because if we skip this, it kind of doesn't matter what else we do. Like, yeah, we can make it look prettier, and we can make it do like more integrations and all this stuff, and all these different things you could do in software or even hardware or services, but it kind of doesn't matter if you get these wrong. So one of the reasons I wrote the book was a lot of the companies I work with, I felt like they would do interviews and surveys, and that's kind of it. And then they like build the whole thing, or maybe a landing page. And I realized there are like so many things that you can do in addition to that. And the way we frame them is kind of building off of Steve Blank's work in 4 Steps to Epiphany, which kind of informed Eric Ries' Lean Startup book, because Eric was in Steve's class back in the day. But we kind of frame things as discovery and validation. So discovery, it's like I don't have a lot of evidence at all that I'm on the right track here. And so it's more exploratory. So if you think from an evidence point of view, we're trying to get you to go from some, actually even before that, we're trying to get you to go from none to some, okay? So we just want you to gather in like directional evidence that this is actually something that I could possibly build, right? We want you to defer building as long as possible. With validation, it's a bit different. You're usually a little further along in your journey. And so you've already gathered some directional evidence through, a lot of like ethnographic research or search trend analysis, or really scrappy testing with customers just to see, do I understand their jobs, pains, and gains? Do they understand my value proposition? Is there any willingness to pay for this opportunity? Have they paid for this in the past in other ways and hired other products? There's all kinds of stuff you could do. When you get to validation, there's more of a value exchange. And so you're trying to go from an evidence point of view, you're trying to go from some to strong. So basically, when we talk about like MVPs, this is where I personally would put MVPs. And I tried to write a book without saying MVP, and I didn't quite succeed. But if you look at it from like an evidence point of view, you could say, well, a concierge. Like maybe I can just do this manually with almost no tech. You know, a lot of the travel companies do that. Like if I want to do AI with travel, there's probably no AI first, right? I'm just booking travel for people and understanding patterns and looking at data and then automating things, right? And I've seen a lot of that advice, especially for even bootstrap people recently, which is pretty much like do things that don't scale, do it manually. And when you become overwhelmed, you automate the things that you need to automate. And I like that. I like that approach. Rather than raising too much money early on, you know, you own more of your company too that way. With Wizard of Oz, it's kind of like concierge, except basically it's not obvious there's a person involved. And so that is another thing that I have a funny story I can share with you in a bit on that one. But basically, I did a cohort of AI startups in the Valley, I was a couple months ago, and it was very little AI and a lot of spreadsheets and people. So there's some of that going on as well. When you think about other things, there are like a single feature, which is, you know, I did one thing and it just does one thing and it does it really well. And then mashups are becoming more common, especially in software today, where you can mash up different services and end up being a product that you can actually, it might last you 1 to 2 years. You know, it's pretty incredible, the maturity of the tech space now. But basically, there are a series of things here, and I'll share the link to this board here in a minute with you all so you can join me. But we can't cover all 44 of these experiments today, but there is a nice collection that you can choose from to say, okay, here's the kind of risk I have. Then what is like my next best test I could run to get a little more evidence on that before I go and rush to build? Because I've seen some crazy stuff, and I'm sure you all have too, where it's like, well, I talked to 5 customers, then I spent $600K on an app and launched it. And it's like, no, there's like so many things you can do in between that. So what we did, and this is all again based off my coaching with teams and stuff, is we kind of applied a taxonomy to this to help people. So I felt like there's plenty of lists of stuff out there, but what we did is we said, all right, let's kind of break it down. It's not perfect, by the way. And if I do a second edition of these books, there's a good chance these dots are going to change based on what I've seen even the last couple of years. But it's pretty good. What we did is we said, okay, how much do these cost? So think, how much does it cost to do this? Is it free? Is it going to cost me like tens of thousands of dollars to do it? How much is it going to cost to run this experiment? How long is it going to set up? So how long, like much prep time am I going to have to do this? And then how long am I going to need to run it for? So what's the runtime? When I first wrote the book, I had these combined as like just time, but then I realized some of these, like you can set up really quickly, but they run a while, and others take a long time to set up, but then you can run them very quickly. So I broke it out into 2. And then what kind of evidence strength do they generate? Is it light evidence? Is it strong evidence? You know, customer interviews, surveys, they're great. Pretty light evidence. It's like what people say or what they type. It's not necessarily what they'll do. And can you get closer to real world where it's people doing things or people paying for things or giving you their time and attention in a real way? Those are much stronger evidence. We called out the capabilities you'll need at a high level. Either if you don't have those capabilities, maybe you have access to tools that can help you with those capabilities. Like if you're not a designer, but you're trying to spin up a landing page, there are plenty of like tools now that have great templates that are good enough that you can use instead of being, you know, a designer. And then probably one of the biggest things here is, remember those themes I talked about? Desirability, feasibility, viability. We tagged those for every experiment. So you can start to understand, hey, I have a lot of, let's say, desirability risk. What are some experiments I can run that address desirability? Or I have a lot of feasibility risk, a lot of backstage. What are the things I could do to address that? Or I have like viability risk around cost and pricing. What are the things that I can do to address that? And so if you look at this one, concierge is like always a fun one because you're manually doing it all basically. If you look at it, you know, if you're back here creating all this stuff by hand, that's a lot of feasibility that you're trying to address. Like, even though it doesn't scale, you're trying to address the feasibility aspect of it. With desirability, right? You're starting to understand, do people really value this thing that I created? And if they're paying for it, you know, you are also testing viability. And you can also, you know, do back of the napkin math back here. Well, my thing's still drawing, but there we go. You could also look back here and say, like, what's it cost to do this? But if you look at the themes, you can start pecking this apart and say, okay, this is what's going to take to do this manually. Do people value it? Will they pay for it? And start backing your way into some of this and getting like really, really strong evidence for it. So what I want to do is kind of throw a link in here. All right, so you do not have to create an account, by the way. I mean, actually, full disclosure, I do advise this company. So I have to say that, like, more I do these sessions, it's like, oh yeah, I actually help that company. So I actually do advise Mural. However, you can create a free account, or you can just click and you'll just appear as an anonymous snail. So you do not have to create an account even to hang out with me today. So full disclosure though, but I do advise them. All right, so what I did for you all, I know we're trying to get books for people too, and I appreciate all that. But in the meantime, I have a cheat sheet to the book in this board. And I actually gave this presentation to my editor at Wiley, and they were kind of cool with it. So I'm just going to run with it until they tell me to stop. So basically, these cards, these are like little cards. Now, they don't go into the same depth as the book, but it's a pretty amazing cheat sheet. Like, I'll leave this board up for 30 days for you all, but it's a pretty good cheat sheet for you all to have for a bit. And so let's say you weren't sure about, like, what's a good one to talk about with this group? Let's do buy a feature. So let's say you're trying to figure out what customers really want and what they value. Well, buy a feature is a technique that I actually learned from Luke Homan, who wrote Innovation Games, who's based out of San Jose. And it's a thing where you give people essentially play money, and they and some features, and the features all have dollar amounts, and they have to like rank them. They have to spend money on the features they really care about, because there's never enough money to buy all the features. A lot of my B2B clients do something like this. You'll notice here, like, it doesn't take long. It's not that expensive. You can do it pretty quickly, right? And so these are all PDFs. So if you just double click this guy, you can get a higher res thing. All I ask is you don't share this board publicly. Like I said, it'll be up for 30 days, but you can get a nice, like, high res view of what these are. Each one's a PDF. But basically, these are sorted by discovery. So again, when we talked about none to some up here at the top. So let's say, what's another one? Day in the life. So Intuit does this a bunch still. I know the folks that run their day in the life program, they call it Follow Me Home, which is kind of creepy, but they do get permission. They don't just randomly follow people. But you can basically observe people and better understand jobs, pains, and gains. They do that to basically understand how to solve for needs of their customers. So that's one that's really popular as well. But there are a bunch in here, and I can't cover them all today. Down here in validation, we have a bunch of MVPs. We have, if you're familiar with Lean Startup, you know, a lot of these things. I would say one that's becoming really popular recently with my teams has been letter of intent. So what we'll do is we'll write, especially B2B startups, we'll do a one-page letter of intent, which is a non-legally binding contract. And so when we're doing interviews, we'll say, okay, they'll say, oh, this sounds great. I want to buy N number of things, right? We'll say, okay, well, before we do a purchase order, can we just do an LOI, letter of intent, to get this in writing? And some of them won't put it in writing, you know? So then you start to understand, okay, you said this, but you're not willing to put it in writing. So like, this is why I talk about light evidence, stronger evidence, right? Letter of intent is a little stronger evidence because they're putting it in writing, and some people won't. When I'm working in health tech, we'll go into a hospital, nurses will say, I love this device. I want to put this in everywhere. We're like, great. Can you write a letter of intent to, like, or a recommendation, a letter of recommendation even, to your administrator recommending us, right? And they're like, oh, I'm not willing to do that. Like, I love it, but I'm not willing to actually recommend you to the person with purchasing and like purchasing power and decision making in the organization. So there's all different ways you can do this. But basically, what I wanted to do is give you like a taste, and this is a real story, by the way, a taste of kind of like how companies do this and how startups do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this on the fly with you all. And if you've seen this one before, I've actually shared this with a few other meetups recently. So just pretend to be surprised. All right. So one of the ones that I worked on in the past, or worked around in the past, was, and I love this story. It's basically a men's dating advice chatbot. Okay. So this is the team out of New York. Pretty amazing team. The founder is now, she has a different startup where it's not dating advice. It's like advice for young parents on learning milestones and how to shop for their children and their toddlers, right? So it's really interesting. I caught up with her the other day, but basically, this is a this is a real thing that basically would how can I say this? You text it and it would give you advice back on dating. Okay, that's pretty much what it was. But instead of building it right away, they did customer interviews. All right, so that was some of the first experiments they ran. They interviewed men. They ended like, what are the pains with dating? Getting dating advice? Is it overwhelming? Where do you get it from? They also did some search trend analysis after that. So they basically went in and said, okay, what based on, like, you can interview 10 to 15 people, but that doesn't scale, right? So you can go online, you can use different tools to see, are people searching on this topic online or related topics online in region per seasonality and all that. They also did some paper prototyping. So basically they were sketching out what the bot could do, again, and testing with people, not necessarily building anything yet. They did, they created a landing page, okay? And then they also basically did a Wizard of Oz. And there's some other things they did, but I'm just trying to simplify it for you all today. But so when you look at this, and the Wizard of Oz is, it's basically faking the bot experience. So what they did is they had a team of women, and every request that came in, they just pretended like they were a bot, and they gave advice back to the people, and they thought they were talking to a bot, but really they were just talking to women, giving them advice through text. Okay. So if you want to test out a chatbot, instead of building the bot right away, you can kind of just do it yourself. It doesn't scale, which we'll talk about here in a minute, but it's a good way to test, like, the different themes. So what I liked was they tested, with customers, they started to understand qualitatively the insights, and then they used that to inform the search trend analysis. They used that to help inform what the paper prototype of the thing could be and test it with people. They used that to help inform, the landing page and landing page design. And then they did a Wizard of Oz where they basically had, 3 women, right? They had 3 women, and they were texting back men who were putting in real requests. And I have some screenshots of the actual requests, and by chance, I actually know one of the people that sent a request in, which is kind of funny. It's a very small world. But here's where it went awry, okay? So again, not every story has a happy ending, and this one does not. Why this one does not was that their landing page had 1,000 signups in a few hours, okay? So when people say, I say, keep your experiments small, this is one of the reasons I say that, because that completely overwhelmed, these women are just like, how am I going to respond to all these texts? Like, basically they had people complaining on forums saying, I'm so helpless, the bot is ignoring me. My dating life is a mess, So they couldn't even keep up with demand. So when you talk about Wizard of Oz, keep in mind that you have to keep it small. Usually you have a small team, usually you're doing it manually, and you can't have 1,000 signups. Like you can't even get back to these people, right? So they had to change that to a wait list, and that helped stem the tide. And then they could start to, go through and process these requests. Now, interestingly enough, we talked about these 3 circles, right? We talked about desirability, we talked about viability, we talked about feasibility. So desirability, I thought that was a pretty good demand. It was like people love the advice. I still hear stories about some of the questions they asked, which are pretty hilarious, but they loved that they could do that. They could get like advice on demand that was personalized to them. Okay. Feasibility, the can we do it, was kind of a question mark, because it's like, well, you could take all these requests from people and then you can make a bot and you could try to make it happen. But that's really tough. Like, you could do it. It's going to take time to make it like really flow, like in a text conversation. And viability was a huge no. Like, people did not want to pay for this bot. Now, you probably could figure out maybe some weird sponsorship or affiliate or thing. I don't know. There's probably a way to make it work, but this team decided to shelf this one. So not every experiment is going to be successful. Okay. And this one, trying to test out desirability, viability, and feasibility, people loved it, like almost too much. Okay. To be fair. The feasibility is kind of like, well, we could probably get data scientists to work on this and make it a real bot. And then viability was like, well, people don't pay for it. So what is the end game here? Like, what can we do? And so this one was shut down. So what I thought we could do, and this is a real story of one out of New York. I love
way better to learn that early than continue to work on this for a while, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I've met founders that would talk to a couple customers or think there's a problem and just build the bot right away, and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes and then realize that nobody cares. So what I wanted to do, if you all are up for it, and I see a few people here in the board, is I want to give you some time to check over these experiments. So you basically use like the little hand in the corner here. That'll help you drag around if you're having trouble navigating. But basically all these experiments are here for you to basically just explore. And what I thought is, like, some of you are working on some really cool stuff. And if you're willing to share, think about what kind of experiments might help you. Like this one, we went from interviews to search trend to paper prototyping to landing page to Wizard of Oz. That's just one flow. That's not necessarily a flow that you should follow. Maybe there's a different flow. But if you want to create stickies, all you need to do is just double click and type. Like, it's pretty much like using PowerPoint or Keynote. It's pretty easy. If you can't create a sticky, there's a good chance you have the hand icon on and it won't let you edit when you have that on. Okay. So I'm going to set a timer for a few minutes here. I'm going to set it for 5. And here's the link again. And I'm going to play some music, and then I'm going to let you check out these experiments here to the left here, the discovery and the validation experiments. And then if you have something you want to share, great. I'm happy to give feedback. If not, we can jump into some Q&A. Okay. So I'm going to go on mute 5 minutes and go. Have about 3 minutes left. have about 1 minute left. All right, try to finish up. Seatbelt. So, all right. So, does anybody want to share what they came up with? And after that, we could jump into some Q&A. You can just unmute. Who's this one with the paper prototype, clickable prototype, data experiment one? It looks pretty cool. Anyone want to?
That was me. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to explain what you're working on there?
Sure. So basically, we were trying to figure out whether having a portal with information. I'm trying to be careful of what I'm saying here, given I work in a law firm and that's super sensitive. So we were trying to work out whether having a portal with information in was going to be useful to our clients. So the first thing we did was develop a bit of a paper prototype of what the information would contain. Shared that back with the client and said, if we had this as a system and you were accessing information, would this be useful, usable? And they sort of said, yes, sort of, gave us a bit of a direction of what it might look like. And so we built a clickable PowerPoint that would show them how it would actually have the right information in. And that was able to sort of give them a view of actually seeing it. Would they click on it? Would they use it? And then we basically made it a bit more of a high fidelity prototype. So we actually built something very simple with the right data in to show them. And then we've literally done an experiment and said, okay, we'll give you this data, we'll give you this prototype, use it for a month, and then we'll ask you some questions. And then now we're going to meet with them next week. And the biggest question we're going to ask is, you know, if this was real and you could have access to this, would you use it? Would you pay for it? How often would you use it? What would you use it for? When would you not use it? And get more information to figure out before we actually enable it, whether it's valuable.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing. And I know it's hard to talk about things sometimes. I'm insulated by NDAs with
yes, yeah. I'm not a lawyer, but I work with them all the time, and they're super sensitive. So hopefully that gave you a bit of an example of how we've, you know, got from idea into, you know, before we build anything. And these have been quite quick turnarounds between each stage.
Yeah, I think no, this is cool. A couple of things, maybe just points of feedback, and I don't understand the complexity of everything you're working on, of course. Did you notice a change between paper prototyping, which is just kind of like, it's fun, but you're just drawing, right? And you're showing them drawings and everything. Maybe they're pressing a piece on the paper or something. But did you notice a change in like perception or how they gave feedback between paper and clickable, or, you know, paper and data when they were interacting with something, even if it wasn't live and fully baked? Did you notice any difference between, you know, how they responded and how they spoke about the potential thing you were going to build?
Yeah, definitely. So when the first bit is more of a show. And so they sort of understand the concept, but when you're actually physically clicking and looking at something, they're a lot more engaged. And then they're trying to figure out, what information is most useful. And then they're asking more questions about, oh, I'd use this more if we could then drill down here, or if we could get this, or if that was at the click of a button. So they were able to explain a lot more how useful or usable, the idea was by clicking and actually doing something rather than just hearing about it or seeing it.
Yeah, thank you. I've noticed that with some of my other teams as well. Some of my teams love like explainer videos, and I like explainer videos too. But explainer video is a very passive experience, right? You're just like, it's almost like a presentation. You're watching it. Hopefully, and I have little templates for them too. It's like, here's a job, pain and gain, and what we do, and all that. And there's a flow, but it's just a different kind of feedback you get from that. Watching it's like a very passive experience to clicking, even if it doesn't completely work, right? It just might be hot zone buttons here, and there's dummied up data or just screens that move or something, And I've noticed the quality of feedback and just like their excitement level and how that changes by just clicking on something that could literally just be a hack together PowerPoint or Keynote or something. Is really interesting. Another point of feedback, and I just want to bring this up because you're talking about what you're going to say to them when you go back after they've been using it. I think be careful with the would you future hypothetical situations. I know it's tough because they've been using it, but I think I would just challenge you to think through, can you frame the question to have them talk about the past of like, when in the past would this have been useful for you? When did you have a situation that this would have benefited you? Had it been like fully, implemented and all that, or have them talk about how much time and effort and money they spent doing something other ways, right? And I think you're going to get some more interesting insights out of that, because I'm afraid what might happen in the future hypothetical scenarios is they're kind of going to give you, it tells me like, yeah, of course I would pay for that, or of course I would use it, but sometimes they just end up telling you what you want to hear in that situation. And I think one way to get past that is have them talk about the past and events where, I'm doing this with a medical company right now, where we're having them say, well, when in the past would this have been valuable? Like, it's still a would you question, but they can anchor on the past. So that's just something you might want to try if you've yet.
So helpful. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Cool. And so, yeah, and the reason I do this exercise is that this whole process, it's tough, right? It's like applying a scientific method to business. And so it's not just like I was watching this thing the other day where it's like so many inventions have happened by accident and innovations have happened by accident over the years. And you're not going to get it right the first time. And it's going to take some trial and error. So don't think just you're going to run one experiment and then it's going to be enough. Chances are, if I zoom out a bit, when you think about this 2x2 up here, right? You have a collection of things you're worried about that, if wrong, could cause your whole business to fail. So it's going to probably take more than one experiment to really learn about those. And so that's something I've been trying to drill in with my teams, is that this isn't a one-time event. Like, I checked the box, I ran an experiment, now I'm going to move on and build the thing. It's going to take some time. And so if you're looking for time boxes, I might spend something like 12 weeks on this before I make a big decision, because I don't want people to get too excited or too depressed after the first experiment. Because I've unlocked like tens of millions of dollars with companies. And quite often, the first couple experiments, they were ready to give up. They're like, this is hopeless. Nobody wants this. And then we're like, well, maybe we try this instead. Like one of the big famous ones I can't really talk about publicly, but it was with mouth pain, right? It was with pain in your mouth. It was a product. And all these people were like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. And then, what worked for us, like the team was about ready to give up. And what worked for us is we went online and we said, how many people are searching for mouth pain right now? And there are all these search trends. There were like thousands and thousands of search trends, like search queries about mouth pain and solving mouth pain. And we're like, what if we use the same ad and the same landing page and just put it there in the results when they're searching? And we went from like almost a 0% conversion on our page to a 40% conversion. So that's like ridiculous. 40% is really high, by the way, for conversion on a page. And so, that team almost gave up. They were almost like, nope, nobody cares. This is pointless. Why are we even working on this? And it's like, well, what if we just get in front of the people who are actively seeking a solution and see if they like it. You know, so it takes time. It takes time. And so don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so bad at this. It's like back in science class, you know, in high school or something. Really, you try to isolate, like, what are the things I'm really worried about? And then what are the things I can do to learn about those? And can I do it quickly? And keep challenging yourself to do it quickly. And so hopefully, you know, this gives you some opportunities to do that. I know we're over time, especially my time anyway, but I have a couple minutes before I have to go to a kids karate class. But what kind of questions do you all have for me? Anything that like was confusing, or anything that you'd want to ask me while you have my time?
I have a question from, I've heard you use these phrases twice, and I'm not exactly sure what you mean by them, because it's almost like you breathe this. I mean, it's amazing. So the question is, what do you mean by verbs? Verbs are activities you need to do. You use that verbs and nouns thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. So people get confused by this canvas part, especially the back. So everything here in the orange is pretty much like front stage. So think of like you're at a play. And if you're at a play, everything you're watching is like happening on stage. You're interacting with the audience. Like it's like this interaction. It's pretty visible, right?
Yeah.
Backstage, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen to make a play work. Like my wife used to help do like set design. I have some friends that do set design for like theater in San Francisco, right? There's a lot of stuff that has to happen, like props and everybody in the right place and all that. That's a lot of the blue. So when you think about it that way, think about the verbs, activities. So what are the key things you need to do? Is it marketing? Is it creating content? Is it manufacturing? Is it software development? Is it sales? Like what are the big things that you need to do to make this business work? And when you think about resources, those are the nouns you need to have. So think physical, digital. It could be you need a platform, you need a team, you need a patent, you know, there's some kind of IP that you need. So I like separating those activities and resources as think about what are the key verbs or key activities that you need to do to make this work. And then with resources, think about what are the key nouns, what are the physical and digital things I need. And there might be hundreds of those, but think about like you're trying to explain this to an investor, or you're trying to explain this to a co-founder you want to bring on. It should be high level. It shouldn't be down like, this isn't project management. I mean, not that the project manager is very much needed, but this level, it's more like I'm telling a story at a high level, at a stakeholder level, at an investor level. And so think about the key things that you need to have and you need to do to make the business work. And when you tell a story, I've noticed that if you follow even these numbers and you said, here's my customer, this is the value I create for them, here's how we reach them, this is our relationship, here's how we make money. And then when you think backstage, you're like, here's the thing we need to do, things we need to do, here's things we need to have, here's what costs, and who we're partnering with. If that story doesn't make sense along the way somewhere, it's probably an issue with your strategy. Like I work with a lot of startups that they'll just like load up the revenue stream box with a bunch of stuff. And then I'm like, oh, so where does that revenue come from? And it's like, well, I don't know. It just sounded good. It's just like, no, we need a source for the revenue, right? Like, and so the storytelling, I keep coming back to the storytelling. It is so important. I mentioned this on a video actually with Draper University, working with Tim Draper in San Mateo. And I had a startup founder in there that said, this is the first time anyone's ever understood my startup. And I was like, that's great. Like now you can tell a story about it, you know? And so everyone's so deep, like subject matter expert, domain expert, and we talk in words that we're comfortable with.
Yeah.
We need to be able to tell stories about our company, about our business, especially the business model. And I feel like if you have a problem in your story, there's a good chance there's like a problem with your model. And so I've been really trying to emphasize storytelling in all this.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm very excited about this. So cool to be with you live and to be able to ask a question. Wait till I tell Cameron and Dan, because they said, oh, can you give me because I asked them what that meant in your video, and they said, can you give us the timestamps?
Yeah, I'll have to talk to, actually, I'm talking to them soon, so I'll let them know.
That's so funny.
But yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for a while, but I think a lot of this stuff I feel is taught, but it's not taught at a very actionable way. And so what I'm trying to do with this work and hanging out with you all and writing this book is trying to make it a bit more actionable for people and less like this is a thought exercise, right? Because what I want to do is help you run experiments to de-risk what you're working on. Like the goal isn't even to run experiments, right? The goal is to de-risk what you're working on. And so do you have a hobby or do you have a startup? You know, like some people just have really expensive hobbies and they call them startups and they don't make any money and they keep throwing money at it. And so being able to kind of work through this risk is really, really important. So it was a great question though.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I know I want to be sensitive because David did tell us beforehand that he actually had to sign off for us and we still have the opportunity to hang together. But I wanted to make sure that you were aware that David is actually running a few workshops over the next little bit. And I just put one in that registration is tomorrow. Is that correct? It finishes tomorrow?
Yeah, the timing of this is interesting. I don't want to put pressure on you all. I didn't plan it this way. But so I'm doing a small cohort. So I don't know if you're familiar with cohorts. Think like if you're familiar with Seth Godin and that kind of stuff, it's pretty much like a small collection of people that are individually working on their own ideas. And so I'm running my first one. The cutoff's tomorrow, but it starts next week and it runs for 10 days. And basically I take you through this whole process and you're also doing it with other people. And so they're all working on their own stuff, but then we can share out together. So the reason I'm doing this is because I do a lot of really giant workshops like conferences, but people can't work on their own stuff. It's always like a case study and it's fun and we have live music and it's amazing, but I wanted something more like intimate and kind of down to earth. And so that's why I'm doing these. So that's the July cohort that's based on the book that I created new content for, which is starting next week. The other thing that's really tried and tested and been at with, I don't know how many we've done this. We do 2 or 3 a year since the pandemic started. We used to do them in person. Now we do them remote, is the masterclass. And I'll just like literally double click on it for you here. But basically the masterclass is what I do with Alex. And those are 3-day events and they're pretty like high production quality. Like you can see what we're doing here. So basically we have live music. It's pretty crazy and people love them. Like we keep it really high paced. We've actually extended the time on these. We used to do them, they were a bit shorter and we realized people just wanted more. So we extended an hour each day now. And that's happening in September. So that's a more big experience if you want to like network with other entrepreneurs, innovators and stuff around the world. That's a great one to come to. But if you're looking for something a little more intimate, the July thing, hopefully I do more of these. I'm kind of testing it out right now, but it's very promising. I like this idea of having like a small group of people together. It's kind of where I shine. So yeah, that's stuff that I'm working on. If you're curious, like how else to get value out of this stuff, if you're really into it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. I have some comments to say. Of course, I have some background in system building, and so it starts from the design, and then you build the system and you do verification, and then go to evaluation of the system, and then verification, and then validation, and then evaluation. Where verification meant to build the system right, and validation to build the right system, and evaluation is like the proof of pudding is in its eating. An example of this is a very simple example is building a house. So you give you choose the design of the house, you give the design to the engineer to build the house, and you go visit the house and to see if it is as you like or not. It is as you like, so it is validated or evaluated. But it happens that the engineer built the house in the neighbor land, not in your land. So you lose everything. So it's a cycle that, of course, it's academic point of view. There is a lot of details in every step, or during the system. The model is nice. and and I like it. I enjoy the lecture very much, and it was very useful. But this is the comments that I want to share with the audience.
Yeah, thank you. You know, we often, some of my workshops, we show videos from Frank Gehry, you know, and how he worked, and he would, a really famous architect, and he would talk about how he makes really rough models very quickly and with the clients, and just like basically going wide. So he would go for very many different models, and then they narrow into something, and they go wide and narrow. So this double diamond kind of thing from design thinking. And one of the case studies I have in my book is actually, it's a micro apartment. So the guy built, it's based in Europe, but he built a prototype apartment that was very modular, and then he had people test it. So he would, it was for business travelers, and he would have business travelers come and stay in it. And then he would test it with cleaning people, and he would say, is it hard to clean? You know, because he could have something that people like to stay in, but then if people couldn't clean it, it would be really expensive, you know? And I really loved how he tested it. Like, even though it was literally an apartment, you know, he kept just taking rounds and rounds of people through it and cleaning people. So I feel like while this is really common in software, I am noticing other industries obviously work this way. And yeah, there are many different ways to approach it. I think we're really trying to boil it down as this is kind of like scientific method applied to business, basically. I need to go.
David, thank you so much for your opportunity for speaking with everyone.